Have you ever wondered how your life would look if you were born into another family?
You ever walk into one of those family events where the air thickens with unspoken judgments and forced smiles, the kind that dredge up every past failure like mud from a riverbed after a storm? And there I was stepping onto the manicured lawn of my parents' suburban Ohio home for my sister Sarah's engagement party. My stomach knotted tighter than the silk ties on the rented tent poles, because after 2 years of picking up the shattered pieces of my divorce from Tom, who had traded our quiet life for the thrill of his younger assistant's admiration, I knew this gathering would dissect me all over again under the guise of celebrating her perfect match with Brad, the slick real estate broker whose flashy SUV and weekend golf outings screamed the stability everyone assumed I had forever forfeited. Sarah, ever the poised one at 38 with her marketing job that paid for those designer handbags she flashed like badges of success, had texted me the week before insisting I arrive early to help string the fairy lights and arrange the floral centerpieces that overflowed with white roses symbolizing purity and new beginnings. Themes that felt like subtle jabs at my own tangled history since Mom had taken to sighing about how Sarah's path proved that settling down young avoided the messes I had waded into, and as I pulled up in my reliable but unremarkable sedan, clutching a modestly priced bottle of Chardonnay that I suspected would pale against the imported champagne's Brad's family had flown in from California vineyards, I braced myself for the familiar wave of their collective gaze that always lingered a beat too long on my bare ring finger. My secret about Alexander simmered beneath the surface like a pot left too long on low heat, ready to boil over if prodded. Because how do you explain to a family rooted in Cleveland's blue-collar traditions that your fiancé runs a tech firm valued in the millions from discreet offices in Silicon Valley? A man who prefers midnight strategy sessions over cocktail hours and sends you handwritten notes on heavy stock paper instead of diamond baubles, especially when they already viewed my post-divorce phase as a descent into whimsical solitude marked by freelance graphic design gigs that paid the bills, but never impressed at Thanksgiving tables where Dad touted his retirement from the auto plant as the pinnacle of reliable manhood. We had met unexpectedly at a design conference in Chicago last spring, where I was sketching logos for upstart apps and he delivered a keynote on innovative algorithms without the bombast of the other speakers, his quiet intensity drawing me into conversations that stretched through coffee breaks and evolved into weekends away that rebuilt my faith in partnership after Tom's betrayal had left me questioning every gesture of affection. Yet I kept Alexander tucked away not from embarrassment, but from the fear that their skepticism would taint what we had, turning his genuine world into fodder for their eye-rolling dismissals of my so-called imaginary escapes. A term Sarah had coined teasingly during a family call when I dodged questions about dating by joking about a phantom suitor who whisked me off without the drama of real commitments. The backyard buzzed with early arrivals as I pitched in, unfolding chairs that creaked under the weight of memory-laden conversations starting up around the appetizer platters laden with cheese boards and artisanal crackers that Sarah had sourced from a trendy downtown caterer, her laughter pealing out as she directed Brad in positioning the photo booth backdrop emblazoned with their monogrammed initials, a display of unity that contrasted sharply with the isolation I felt weaving garlands through the archway, my thoughts drifting to the last time Alexander and I had stolen a day together hiking the misty trails near Lake Tahoe, where he opened up about his own guarded past shaped by parents who prioritized appearances over emotional bonds. Revelations that bonded us deeper but also highlighted why I hesitated to parade him before relatives who measured worth by visible markers like house sizes and vacation snapshots shared on social media. Aunt Linda, with her perpetual perm and stories of bridge club triumphs, cornered me by the punch bowl as guests trickled in, her inquiry about my love life delivered with that well-meaning curiosity that bordered on intrusion, prompting me to murmur something non-committal about focusing on work while inwardly cringing at the pity etching her features, because she remembered the raw edges of my separation when Tom packed his bags amid accusations of my emotional unavailability. A narrative they all bought without questioning his role in the unraveling. As twilight softened the edges of the sprawling lawn dotted with picnic tables and a fire pit crackling to life, The crowd swelled to include cousins and in-laws who exchanged air kisses and compliments on Sarah's glowing complexion. Her engagement ring catching the first glimmers of the strung lights like a beacon of the future they all envied, and Dad, in his pressed khakis, and the polo shirt monogrammed with his initials from a long-ago company outing, clinked his glass to kick off the toasts, his voice booming with pride over Sarah's journey from college sorority star to this poised fiancé whose life aligned so neatly with the expectations he had quietly imposed on us both. Words that flowed into praises of Brad's entrepreneurial spirit without a single nod to the paths not taken like mine that veered into creative uncertainties after the divorce stripped away the facade of our picture-perfect facade. Uncle Ray, Dad's boisterous brother with a laugh that rattled like loose change in a pocket and a penchant for one too many beers at these events, leaned into the microphone next with a grin splitting his ruddy face, his toast veering into playful territory as he raised his glass to Sarah's happiness and then, with a wink aimed squarely at me, wondered aloud if my elusive fiancé had finally materialized or if he remained the imaginary companion I had teased about in family chats, his comment igniting a chorus of chuckles that rippled through the assembly like a shared inside joke at my expense, their eyes turning toward me expectant and amused amid the clinking glasses and murmurs of agreement that painted me once more as the family's endearing but pitiable outlier. I held my silence amid the laughter echoing off the tent canvas, the sound twisting in my chest like a knot refusing to loosen, because beneath the humor lay the sting of their assumptions about my solitude. Assumptions fed by my own guarded choices that now amplified the isolation even as a distant vibration hummed in the air, faint at first but insistent, drawing curious glances skyward while my pulse quickened with the possibility that the evening script was about to rewrite itself in ways they could never anticipate. That faint vibration humming through the evening air turned heads skyward for a fleeting moment before fading into the night's chorus of crickets and distant traffic from the nearby highway, leaving me stranded once more in the midst of the laughter that Uncle Ray's quip had unleashed like a poorly aimed firecracker scattering sparks of embarrassment across the faces turned toward me, their amusement at my supposed imaginary fiancé swelling into a full-throated chorus as Sarah stepped forward, with her glass raised in mock solidarity, her voice lilting over the group with a comment about how my creative storytelling always lightened these gatherings even if it meant fabricating a whole romance to rival her real one with Brad, whose arm she looped possessively as if to underscore the tangible proof of commitment glinting on her finger. The relatives leaned in closer around the clusters of high-top tables where half-empty plates of grilled skewers and corn on the cob sat forgotten amid the rising tide of conversation laced with those familiar barbs wrapped in affection. Cousin Jenny with her sharp bob haircut and the wedding band she twisted nervously during pauses sidling up to murmur that at least my fictional beau sounded more exciting than the parade of duds she had swiped past on apps before landing her own steady accountant. Her words intended as camaraderie, but landing like another layer of the pity they doled out in measured doses, since my divorce had become family lore, retold with varying degrees of sympathy at every holiday meal from Easter brunches to 4th of July barbecues. I forced a smile that pulled at the corners of my mouth like taffy stretched too thin, my fingers tracing the stem of my wine glass as I scanned the faces illuminated by the warm glow of the lanterns strung overhead, each expression a mirror reflecting back the narrative they had scripted for me as the sister who dreamed too big after losing the life she once had with Tom, the man whose departure amid whispers of office flirtations had left me navigating solo the freelance world of deadlines and client revisions that paid enough to keep my small apartment afloat, but never enough to silence the undercurrent of doubt about my choices to prioritize independence over the security they all chased. Mom circulated through the crowd with a tray of lemon bars dusted in powdered sugar that stuck to fingers and prompted compliments on her baking prowess, her eyes flicking toward me with that blend of concern and exasperation she reserved for moments when family dynamics tipped toward discomfort. Pulling me aside near the edge of the tent where the fabric billowed gently in the breeze carrying scents of blooming jasmine from the garden beds Dad had tended for decades, her voice dropping to a confidential tone as she suggested perhaps it was time to consider setting the fantasies aside for something grounded, like joining a singles group at the community center where she volunteered. Advice born from her own era of matchmaking through church socials that had landed her with Dad after a whirlwind courtship in the 70s, but now clashed against the realities of apps and autonomy that defined my 40s. I nodded along, murmuring assurances about focusing on my design projects that involved crafting logos for eco-friendly startups and occasionally illustrating book covers for local authors, pursuits that filled my evenings with purpose after the emptiness of shared silences with Tom had eroded our bond. Yet inwardly I wrestled with the irony of my secrecy about Alexander, whose texts arrived sporadically throughout the day with updates on his negotiations in Seattle that hinted at the scale of his ventures without boasting. Messages that grounded me more than any public declaration could amid the sea of skepticism, where even Brad chimed in from across the way with a booming laugh directed at Uncle Ray's follow-up jest about whether my phantom partner came equipped with a cape to match the invisibility cloak. His comment drawing nods from the men clustered by the cooler restocking beers and drawing a fresh peel from Sarah, who leaned into him with the ease of someone whose life unfolded predictably, while mine zigzagged through uncertainties I chose not to illuminate for fear of their dismissive shrugs. The band's playlist shifted to upbeat covers of 80s hits that had Aunt Linda swaying with Uncle Ray in a tipsy two-step near the dance area, marked by chalk lines on the grass, their movements loosening tongues further as conversations splintered into subgroups trading stories of engagements past and futures imagined. And I found myself drawn into a circle with a few second cousins who pressed for details on my dating life with the persistence of relatives sensing vulnerability, their questions probing like fingers into an old bruise as one recounted her own rebound fling after a breakup that led to her current bliss, while another speculated aloud if my reluctance to share stemmed from lingering heartbreak over Tom's swift remarriage to the woman who had appended our home with her organized chaos of color-coded planners and weekend brunches. Humor surfaced in my deflections, like when I quipped that an imaginary fiancé at least handled his own laundry without complaints, a line that elicited chuckles and momentarily shifted the spotlight, but left a hollow echo because beneath the wit lay the genuine ache of withholding Alexander's reality. The man who had surprised me with a weekend in Napa where we tasted wines under vineyard arches and discussed dreams deferred by corporate ladders. Conversations that wove our histories together without the pressure of performances like this party where authenticity felt as fragile as the bubbles rising in the champagne flutes passed around during Sarah's turn at the microphone. She glowed under the attention, recounting the proposal on that chartered boat gliding along Lake Erie with Brad down on one knee amid a sunset painted in hues of orange and pink. Details that painted their love as cinematic perfection, while glances strayed back to me expectant of a counter-narrative I refused to provide. The weight of their amusement building like storm clouds until Brad raised his glass in a toast that circled back to family quirks, his words slyly incorporating a nod to creative imaginations running wild in the best of us, which prompted another round of laughter that crested just as my phone vibrated insistently in my pocket with a message from Alexander reading en route. Coordinates locked, the words igniting a spark of anticipation that clashed against the doubt creeping in from their relentless teasing. As the evening deepened with the fire pit flames leaping higher to ward off the cooling air and guests pairing off for slow dances to ballads that evoked memories of proms and first dates, the jabs evolved into a symphony of subtle prods with cousin Jenny sliding beside me on a bench to suggest downloading a profile picture of my so-called beau for the family group chat, her tone playful yet pointed as if challenging the veil I maintained. And I countered with a light remark about privacy being the ultimate luxury in a world of oversharing that quieted her for a moment, but amplified the isolation threading through the festivities until suddenly the thrum returned stronger, undeniable this time as rotor blades slicing through the darkness. The sound swelling over the music and murmurs until every conversation fractured, bodies pivoting toward the horizon where a silhouette emerged against the starry backdrop, descending with purposeful grace toward the open expanse of lawn beyond the party's perimeter. The rotor blades' relentless thrum crescendoed into a symphony that drowned out the band's languid melody and the scattered applause following Sarah's heartfelt recounting of her engagement's serendipitous details. Every guest pivoting in unison toward the encroaching shadow that stretched across the dew-kissed grass like an uninvited harbinger reshaping the evening's carefully curated narrative. The helicopter's fuselage catching glints from the overhead lights as it hovered momentarily before settling with a precision that spoke of pilots accustomed to high-stakes landings in far less forgiving terrains than this manicured suburban expanse where wild rabbits typically claimed the night hours undisturbed. Wind gusts whipped napkins into frenzied spirals and tugged at the tent flaps, prompting Mom to clutch her cardigan tighter around her shoulders while Dad shielded his eyes against the swirling dust. Their expressions a mosaic of confusion and budding excitement that mirrored the broader ripple of reactions spreading through the assembly as Uncle Ray bellowed something about a celebrity crash-landing his midlife crisis right into our backyard. His attempt at levity masking the undercurrent of envy flickering in his gaze, since tales of private aviation belonged to the glossy magazines he flipped through at the dentist, rather than the tangible world of union shifts and modest retirements. I remained rooted near the gift table, my breath catching in my throat as the engines powered down to a low whine. The door sliding open to reveal Alexander emerging with that unhurried grace honed from boardrooms where deals closed in whispers and exits timed to maximum impact. His charcoal suit impeccable despite the transcontinental flight and the leather satchel slung over one shoulder containing the thoughtful tokens he had curated with the same meticulous care he applied to debugging code or negotiating partnerships that spanned continents. He navigated the trampled path toward the heart of the party without a glance at the gawking faces. His focus laser-sharp on mine amid the chaos he had orchestrated not for spectacle, but as a deliberate counterpoint to the isolation their teasing had woven around me throughout the hours of appetizers and anecdotes. Stopping first at Sarah and Brad, where he extended a slim box wrapped in matte silver paper that she accepted with fingers trembling slightly against the ribbon, her eyes widening as she peeked inside to reveal a pair of crystal champagne flutes etched with intertwining vines symbolizing enduring bonds, a gesture that elevated their union beyond the yacht proposal's flashiness into something timeless, yet he followed it seamlessly by handing a larger parcel to my parents, containing a framed antique map of Lake Erie annotated with historical notes on the very waters where Brad had proposed, details gleaned from a quick call I had made weeks earlier to ensure the gifts resonated personally without overshadowing the couple's milestone. Brad murmured a stunned thank you, his salesman poise cracking just enough to reveal genuine appreciation, mingled with the competitive edge that defined his world of open houses and closing arguments, while Sarah's smile held a brittle edge as if recalibrating the evening's hierarchy in her mind, the relatives murmuring in clusters about the audacity of such an entrance that transformed their mockery into a backdrop for this unforeseen revelation. Alexander moved through the periphery next, distributing smaller envelopes to Aunt Linda and Uncle Ray, vouchers for a weekend getaway to the Finger Lakes where they could indulge in wine tours without the hassle of driving. Chosen after I shared snippets of their travel dreams during late-night confessions that bridged our separate lives, and Cousin Jenny received a sleek tablet preloaded with design software upgrades tailored to her hobbyist photography, each presentation accompanied by concise well wishes that diffused the initial shock into a hum of intrigued whispers acknowledging the depth of consideration behind the extravagance. Finally reaching me amid the hushed anticipation that had blanketed the lawn like fresh snowfall, he set the satchel aside and took my hand in his, the warmth of his palm steadying the tremor I had suppressed since the first vibrations echoed, lifting it to his lips in a kiss that lingered with the intimacy of our private moments stolen in quiet cafes or rain-slicked streets far from judgmental eyes, his voice projecting clearly over the residual hum of the rotors as he declared to the riveted crowd my wife, the two words slicing through the remnants of laughter like a blade through silk, igniting a profound silence that enveloped the gathering where glasses ceased clinking and breaths held collective in the revelation's wake. The title hung in the air, transforming the evening from a stage for their amusement at my supposed delusions into a tableau of reevaluation where Brad's jaw slackened and Mom's hand flew to her mouth in a gesture of unfiltered astonishment. Uncle Ray's beer bottle pausing midway to his lips as he processed the shift from punchline to protagonist in my narrative, and Sarah's eyes narrowed with a flash of something sharper than surprise. Perhaps the recognition that my guarded life harbored realities eclipsing her scripted perfection. Triumph surged through me like adrenaline after a long-held breath released, the revenge manifesting not in confrontation, but in this elegant appending that exposed their assumptions as the narrow confines of their own experiences. Yet, even as satisfaction bloomed, a pang of hesitation gripped me because embracing him fully in that moment would affirm the choices I had made to compartmentalize our bond. Choices that now invited scrutiny into the vulnerabilities we both carried from past wounds. Like Tom's infidelity that scarred my trust and Alexander's early losses that fueled his relentless drive, dilemmas that made the audience question if such a public unveiling healed or merely papered over the fractures beneath. He drew me closer with a subtle squeeze, oblivious to the internal whirlwind as he scanned the faces now alight with questions unspoken. The gift's wrappers crinkling under curious fingers that began to explore their contents, while the band faltered into silence awaiting cues. But Sarah broke the spell first by detaching from Brad's side and striding toward us with purposeful steps that sank into the grass, her expression a storm cloud gathering as she grasped my arm and demanded in a voice laced with urgency that we step away immediately because this dramatic interlude had unraveled threads she never anticipated pulling loose in the fabric of our family's delicate balance. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened like a vice forged from years of sibling rivalries simmering beneath the surface of holiday cards and shared childhood bedrooms. Her nails digging crescents into my skin as she steered me toward the shadowed periphery of the house where the tense glow faded into the inky yard dotted with fireflies that danced oblivious to the turmoil unfolding. Her breath coming in sharp bursts that carried the faint tang of champagne mingled with the raw edge of betrayal she perceived in my silence during the hours of their collective ribbing about my fabricated romance. We halted near the garden shed Dad had built decades ago from salvaged lumber during one of his weekend projects that symbolized the sturdy reliability he preached in every life lesson from career choices to marital vows. And there Sarah unleashed a torrent of words accusing me of orchestrating this helicopter spectacle as a calculated sabotage to eclipse her engagement's spotlight with my hidden drama, her eyes flashing with the injustice of it all since she had curated every detail from the playlist evoking romantic nostalgia to the personalized menus that catered to dietary quirks among the guests. Elements meant to cement her narrative as the family's success story, while I lingered in the footnotes as the divorced dreamers spinning tales to mask solitude. I absorbed her outburst with a calm that surprised even me, the revenge's subtle satisfaction blooming in the way her composure cracked, revealing the insecurities she buried under layers of social media perfection and career accolades. Because exposing her vulnerability without retaliation felt like the wittiest riposte to the evening's earlier humiliations where her laughter had led the chorus mocking my so-called imaginary fiancé as if my life post-Tom warranted only pitying amusement rather than genuine curiosity about the paths I had forged through freelance contracts that demanded late nights at my drafting table and occasional trips to industry meetups where connections like Alexander blossomed unexpectedly. Mom materialized from the dispersing crowd like a guardian summoned by intuition, her sensible flats crunching over the gravel path as she inserted herself between us with hands outstretched in placation. Her voice a soothing cadence honed from mediating playground squabbles and teenage arguments over curfews, urging Sarah to breathe and me to explain because the revelation of Alexander as my husband had upended the party's equilibrium in ways that left relatives milling in stunned clusters, exchanging theories about surprise weddings eloped to Vegas or secret ceremonies on private islands far removed from Ohio's grounded traditions. Alexander navigated the aftermath with effortless diplomacy, engaging Dad in a discussion about the antique map's historical annotations that sparked a rare animation in my father's usually reserved demeanor. The two men bonding over shared appreciation for local lore, while Brad hovered nearby nursing a fresh drink that he swirled absent-mindedly. His earlier confidence eroded into awkward glances that betrayed the sting of comparison between his yacht proposal and this airborne entrance that redefined extravagance on terms beyond real estate showings. Humor threaded through the apologies trickling my way as Uncle Ray approached with a sheepish grin, clapping Alexander on the back with a comment about how the imaginary tag now seemed downright prophetic given the real deal arrival that outshone any backyard barbecue he had ever hosted. His backpedaling laced with that light vulgarity of folksy exaggeration when he joked about needing a chopper himself to escape Aunt Linda's endless bridge recaps, a line that drew reluctant chuckles from the group and allowed me a moment of witty counter by remarking that family secrets kept things interesting, much like the hidden compartments in Dad's old toolbox where surprises waited for the right twist of the wrist, exposing the hypocrisy of their prying judgments without direct confrontation and turning the tide toward tentative acceptance. Aunt Linda sidled up next with the necklace gift clutched in her palm, its pendant catching the moonlight as she probed gently about the timeline of our marriage, her questions veering into speculations about elopements that skipped the fuss of white dresses and tiered cakes, and I shared fragments of the truth that Alexander and I had exchanged vows in a quiet ceremony overlooking the Pacific 6 months prior, a decision born from the intimacy we cherished after my divorce's public unraveling had soured me on spectacle and his own history of a failed engagement in his 20s that left him wary of performative commitments, details that humanized our bond without fully unveiling the layers of trust we still navigated like uncharted waters where my freelance instability clashed against his structured empire of algorithms and acquisitions. The evening's energy shifted into a peculiar hybrid of celebration laced with interrogation, guests toasting to unexpected joys while slipping in queries about Alexander's profession that he deflected with vague allusions to tech innovations enhancing everyday efficiencies, preserving the aura of mystery that amplified the intrigue without inviting deeper scrutiny into the vulnerabilities we both harbored. Such as the nights I spent alone questioning if his absences stemmed from dedication or detachment, much like Tom's gradual withdrawal had masked his wandering affections. Sarah circled back after cooling in the house, her demeanor softened into reluctant curiosity as she admitted the jealousy that had flavored her jabs stemmed from watching me rebuild without the safety nets she relied on. A confession that prompted my own honest reflection on how secrecy shielded our happiness from their well-intentioned but stifling advice, fostering a fragile bridge between us that hinted at reconciliation yet left dilemmas unresolved because forgiving her barbs so readily felt like another evasion, one that made me wonder if I perpetuated the cycles of misunderstanding by choosing silence over confrontation in moments that demanded raw vulnerability. As the party wound down with yawns punctuating farewells and the band packing instruments into cases that echoed hollowly across the lawn, Alexander and I lingered by the helicopter where he pulled me into a quiet alcove near the garage, his arms encircling my waist as he confessed partial truths about his past. The pressure from a family that viewed his success as a means to fund their comforts after his parents' acrimonious split had instilled a habit of compartmentalizing emotions to avoid entanglements that echoed my own post-divorce armor, gestures that deepened our connection, but surfaced the twist of whether such guardedness truly sustained us or merely delayed inevitable reckonings, especially when his phone illuminated with an incoming call from an unfamiliar prefix that he silenced with a tense furrow of his brow, excusing himself to answer in hushed tones by the craft's shadowed side, leaving me to ponder if this cryptic interruption heralded threats from his high-stakes world that could unravel the fragile triumph we had just claimed amid the fading echoes of the party's transformed ambience. Alexander's hushed conversation by the helicopter trailed off into the night's enveloping quiet as he pocketed his phone with a deliberate motion that smoothed the tension from his features before rejoining me at the garage's edge where the party's remnants scattered like confetti after a storm, guests exchanging final hugs laced with newfound deference that transformed their earlier pity into a mosaic of curiosity and reluctant admiration, their voices carrying snippets of speculation about Our elopement's seaside backdrop and the tech whispers surrounding his empire that positioned him as the enigmatic force reshaping family lore from whispers of my delusions to tales of quiet triumph. Sarah lingered nearby after her earlier confrontation, her posture less rigid now as she approached with a glass of water clutched like a truce flag. Her admission spilling forth in a rush about how the jealousy that had sharpened her engagement's every flourish stemmed from envying the self-sufficiency I had cultivated in the divorce's aftermath when she chased external validations through promotions and proposals that now rang hollow against the authenticity she glimpsed in my guarded happiness. Words that bridged the chasm between us with a vulnerability mirroring the sibling bonds we had strained through years of comparisons from ballet recitals to career milestones, prompting me to reciprocate with an honest recounting of how the imaginary fiancé facade served as armor against their relentless prods that equated my freelance freedoms with failure while overlooking the fulfillment derived from designing campaigns for causes that mattered and stealing weekends with Alexander in cities where judgments dissolved into shared silences. Mom enveloped us both in an embrace that smelled of vanilla from the lemon bars and faint perfume, her tears glistening under the porch light as she pulled Alexander into the fold with murmurs of welcome to the family he had appended so profoundly, her shift from concern to pride echoing the broader realignment where Dad raised a final toast from the driveway with his voice steadier than earlier, praising the surprises that proved bloodlines resilient in the face of assumptions and extending an invitation for holiday dinners that carried the weight of inclusion long denied. His humbled warmth delivering the ultimate revenge through this organic reclamation of my place without the need for further spectacle. Uncle Ray contributed a boisterous chuckle to the farewells, slapping Alexander's shoulder with a comment about how this night's plot twist rivaled any fishing yarn he spun at lodge meetings where tall tales of catches exaggerated beyond belief now paled against the reality of rotor blades and revelation. His light vulgarity surfacing in a jest about needing wingman lessons from a guy who turned backyard bashes into airstrips, a line that elicited groans and grins from the thinning crowd and allowed me a parting quip about family adventures keeping life from flatlining like a forgotten Netflix queue, witty deflections that sealed the evening's humiliations into memorable anecdotes rather than lingering wounds. Brad shook hands with Alexander amid the engine's preliminary hum, his competitive edge softened into genuine curiosity about venture insights that hinted at potential collaborations bridging real estate with innovative apps, while cousin Jenny snapped a group photo that captured the transformed tableau under the stars, her earlier suggestions about dating apps forgotten in the glow of this unforeseen chapter that redefined my narrative from outlier to oracle of hidden depths. As the last cars crunched down the gravel drive with taillights fading into the rural dark, Alexander and I boarded the helicopter where the interior's leather seats cradled us in plush comfort contrasting the party's folding chairs. His hand finding mine across the console as we lifted off with a surge that pressed us back into the cushions, the lawn shrinking below into a patchwork of lights and laughter echoes that marked the threshold between concealment and exposure. He leaned in during the ascent, his breath warm against my ear as he dismissed the call as a minor investor query from overseas that demanded no immediate action. Yet the vagueness lingered like a half-told story fueling the twist of whether his world of encrypted deals and midnight mergers harbored threats that could eclipse our fragile union much as Tom's deceptions had eroded trust from within. Dilemmas that amplified the audience's unease because my choice to embrace this life without demanding full transparency echoed the very silences that invited the family's initial mockery, prompting reflections on if the revenge's satisfaction masked a rebound facade where passion papered over incompatibilities like my creative drifts clashing against his precision, or if it forged an unbreakable alliance tested by the very ambiguities we navigated. Sarah's parting wave from the porch blended with Mom's silhouette in a scene of tentative harmony that promised mended fences yet left questions about the cost of secrecy in sustaining bonds strained by unspoken resentments, and as the helicopter banked toward the horizon streaked with dawn's first blush, Alexander murmured endearments about future escapes to properties he envisioned as our sanctuary away from prying eyes and corporate pulls. his words weaving hope with the undercurrent of uncertainties that made me gaze out at the receding landscape, wondering if we would navigate the turbulence ahead with the same bold arrivals, or if the ground's pull of hidden doubts would ground us in revelations postponed. The night's triumph tinged with an open-ended ambiguity that invited contemplation on trust's delicate balance and the enduring echoes of choices that shaped destinies in ways both liberating and haunting.